Today we're talking about diversity and early language. We're all different and the classroom is very diverse. It's estimated by the year 2025, more than 50% of children enrolled in America's schools will be members of a quote-unquote minority group. Not only are schools different and diverse with ethnicity, but they're also diverse culturally. There are all kinds of families that children come from. Children enter school with a variety of experiences and others with very little experiences, since they come to us on all levels. Preschool has a profound impact on the general cognitive development and academic abilities, including reading achievement. Long-term studies found school success is primarily dependent upon verbal abilities, particularly accessing new knowledge from reading. Research findings show that high-quality preschool is directly connected to academic success later in elementary school. So what is important to consider for the classroom when trying to meet the needs of a diverse population? One of the things as teachers we need to consider is culture. We need to be very open to understanding other cultures, learning about them, and making our children comfortable from whatever culture they come from. We need to have open communication, especially with our families. We need to be child-focused and sensitive to approaches, and we need to provide a safe environment. When you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the very basic, the very bottom need is for a child to have their needs met, like sleep and food and safety. This includes not only physical safety but also emotional safety. Language acquisition comes from being a part of a community, which allows children to have opportunities to both speak and listen. When we talk about English, we refer to English as the language that we primarily speak in America. We call it English, but there are several variations of that English. First of all, for academic purposes, we call it Standard English. This is the language of our schools and our textbooks. Its uses are advantageous and unifying because it brings together cultures within cultures and thereby minimizes our differences. It's something most children learn. However, in English we also have regional and geographical English, and we see that in different areas of the country, where in the South you have a Southern accent, in the Midwest there's a Midwest accent, in the Northeast there's a Northeast accent, and even within those regions people have their own terms and slang that they use. We see social and ethnic English. Some social groups speak certain ways, and some ethnic groups speak certain ways as well. When we're talking about language, we also need to look at the people in our country that don't speak English as a first language. There are two categories of second language learners. The first one is if a child is American born and raised but have parents whose main language is something other than English. And then those are the ones that immigrate here and they learn the language after being here. They're born with another language and they learn English after living here. Some helpful hints when working with a child that is learning to use English. Always assume that what they're saying is directly related to whatever is going on right now. Try to learn a few expressions in their language. Search for patterns that reoccur in their language. Make the most of what the child already knows and don't dwell on the details. Use scaffolding. That means start with something simple and try to move to something more complicated. Provide safe havens for the child, when the child can come in, places where they can go and where they don't have to speak. Talk about the here and now, and ensure inclusion for these children by making sure that they're invited to group time and that they get a chance to try to communicate. It requires about 4 to 6 years of language learning to become fluent. Some even say that it takes 6 to 8 years. Some languages have sounds that we don't make. And learning a new language can be described in 4 different stages. The first stage is the language that they use at home and that's all they speak. The second is they come in and they observe and they listen. And the third is called telegraphic speech. Just like when a toddler learns to speak, we use telegraphic speech, where the toddler uses intermittent words, 1 or 2 words put together. That's what happens when a person learns a new language as well. And then they go to fluid language. When we talk about acquiring language, we also need to talk about children that have special needs and how to recognize those children that have special needs, especially in the area of language. It's important to be aware of what constitutes the need for an additional assessment. Some children just don't speak right away, and you need to make sure that that's developmentally appropriate. But after observing and watching a child for a long time and they're not progressing in their speech, that's a sign that they should have further assessment. Sometimes if a child speaks excessively, that might be a sign. Or if a child refuses to answer questions, or they confuse similar sounding words. If they're unable to recall or tell stories, or if they just have a general poor recall, if they have poor pronunciation, if they have poor syntax and grammar, or they don't ever volunteer information. Sometimes children have difficulty in their language development because there's a hearing loss or a speech impediment. So some of the causes could be a link between children who have had a pacifier for 3 or more years, and that can cause a speech disorder. Bottle feeding prior to 9 months has been related to some speech disorders. Lack of stimulation, lack of need to talk, poor speech models, insecurity, anxiety, crisis, shyness, and lack of social confidence are all reasons that could be related to children's speech disorders. And then there's language delays. When we talk about language, we're referring to different parts. Language can be broken down into different parts. The first part is syntax, which is putting words together to create sentences, or semantics, which is using words and understanding their meaning, or morphology, which is using word endings and giving the language a context, or pragmatics, which is social language. So some reasons for language delay are the child is kept cooped up, cloistered. The child is overstressed. Expressive and receptive language difficulties can be articulation, they can be voice quality, it can be stuttering and cluttering, selective mutism. The bottom line is the teacher's role is to work with children where they're at, and this is the developmentally appropriate practice. Goals should be clearly understood and in the best interest of children.